Great ancestors, you are breath, you are bridge. You carry us over tumultuous time. You who can hear and answer with quick remedy, you are ready before we ask. You who can speak through tongues of trees and fire and water, this earth cannot hold you. We pound the ground and you appear, O ancient ones. You who can make lightning strike with the flick of a skirt. You who can make tornado turn with the spin and span of hips, take us there, to the place of knowing, to the hall that leads to the doorway of you, O holy ones. You of the first light, you who know the potential of possibility, pulsing in the dark, deliver us unto our gifts. You who have sunlight in your fingertips, touch our drums, make us hear the rising, make us move a steady stump, a choir of voices so majestic, heaven hides us in a tapestry of light, or we are stars, blankets of wonder, sky bright eyes seeing the invisible, visible. You who have returned, you have turned our faces so that we see ourselves, and we have found you again in places we would have never imagined. You make our limits infinitely long. Our vision is clearer with eyes closed, and even there, you still stand in full color, vibrant and eager to serve. They come coffled and cuffed, their feet heavy with uncertainty. You can hear them breathing from miles away, shallow and short. Tethered souls don't know how to breathe deep, and auction blocks do not lend to comfortability, naked and frigid. Tar babies smooth like skin, lathered up real good to conceal any wounds. Now, you know massa like I'm free from disease, or at least appear to be quiet. Now you know massa like I'm silent, and blocks do not lend to protest or chatter. Chattel have no say. Just smile big, show them pearly teeth, stretch, long, push, pull, parade, grope, fold over, wide open. Let us see from behind how much you are worth, how well you can work, how familiar, ancient and new. New is new niggas for sale, fresh cargo. It's new niggas for sale, a lively stock. Don't you see them? Can't you hear it? In the whistle of the wind, in the howl of the breeze, in the pour of the rain. Can you taste it? Sugar cane, sweet indigo, rich rum-like intoxicating. Oh, there is something about suffering that makes men mad and makes others money. Something about others doing your dirty work that somehow seem to keep your hands clean and your conscience clear, clever. Oh, can't you smell it? Oh, it's in the seasoning. Something that makes them more tender, much more palatable, more suitable for enslavement. There is something in the breaking of a spirit that makes a better slave. Can't you feel it? In the thickness of injustice, in the gaze of despair, the click clank of cuff, they come coffled off the good ship. Jesus, it's the longest trip for the Africans, where rich men play with the lives of humans every day. Oh yes, there is something. There is something about suffering that makes men mad and makes others rebel.
On behalf of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, welcome to this virtual racial healing event, Healing in Action. I welcome you in my role as President and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. But I join you today as an African-American woman and mother, someone who is experiencing the events of recent weeks on a very personal level. For me and for many of us, there's no safety from the fear and grief that George Floyd's death taps into. The surge of energy we are witnessing across this country and internationally is the collective outpouring against the brutal force of structural racism. As painful as this time can feel for us as individuals, facing the painful truths is bringing us together, and that is what inspires me. We have the chance to leverage this energy toward change, to take the righteous fury and determination we see in every call for leadership and channel it into positive action. Every person you hear from in the next hour has an idea of where and how to take action on behalf of our common humanity. All of the action steps are not new. We have invested in knowledge and know the way forward, but it takes will to produce change. And today, our collective will is palpable. That's what gives me hope for our children. For us at the Kellogg Foundation, children are at the heart of everything we do. 90 years ago, our founder, Will Keith Kellogg, committed his fortune to an organization so that children could face the future with confidence. This virtual racial healing is in honor of his legacy. Healing is a physical need right now, a process that we can begin today and continue as we move toward action. It starts with hearing and seeing each other, with listening to another person's truth and sharing yours. In fact, it is this hard work that makes change possible. Whatever has brought you here today, listen for where you can join, where you can turn what you are feeling in this moment into positive action. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to the National Day of Racial Healing in Action. I'm your host, Baratunde Thurston. I want to thank the W.K. Kellogg Foundation for creating this space for us to mourn, to heal, and to mobilize. It's an honor to be here with so many luminaries and leaders and all of our allies in the fight for racial justice. For the past month, I've had 3 words seared into my mind and my heart. I can't breathe. Those were, of course, the final words uttered by George Floyd, but not just George Floyd. Also Manuel Ellis, Javier Ambler, Eric Garner, and so many others whose lives were ended too soon. Derek Chauvin held his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But the United States has been suffocating Black people for centuries. Slavery, lynching, a prison industrial complex, all of these have burned up the oxygen, leaving all of us struggling to breathe. But right now, it feels like we might finally have a moment, at least a moment, to come up for air. People around the country and around the world have said enough. Violence against the Black community must end. It will not be tolerated. So I want to start by recognizing all the beautiful, resilient, powerful people who have led the way in this fight. The organizers who have organized thousands of protests in hundreds of cities. The activists who've been on the ground for decades, demanding justice when very few people were paying attention. The protesters who put their bodies on the line in front of police so that Black bodies preserve the right to breathe. This moment brings together all of those who have spent so much time fighting for both racial justice and racial equality, and to those who've been lost along the way. So much love and thanks to those on the ground. People like you who are putting in the work every single day. Thanks to them, thanks to you, this movement is stronger than it's ever been. School districts and major companies are canceling their contracts with the police. Monuments to white supremacy are being torn down all over the globe. A warm welcome to those who are new to this movement in this moment. We've fought so hard, we've sacrificed so much to build this momentum. Hopefully today we can support, uplift, and inspire each other to stay energized and connect our community of activists, advocates, and healers so we can actually make sustained change. Today, as we make the space to grieve, to mourn, to heal, let us also strengthen our resolve for the fights that lay ahead. If you're looking for ways to advance racial healing and bring it into action in your organization, your place of worship, your workplace, your household, please visit our website at dayofracialhealing.org. We have resource kits and action items. You need not be lost. To start us off, I want to welcome Dr. Celeste Clark, who chairs the Board of Trustees of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Dr. Clark, I want to thank you for bringing us together and for all your work to advance this issue and related issues. After Dr. Clark, we're going to hear from author, transformational leader, and co-founder of the National Compadres Network, Jerry Tello. But first, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Celeste Clark.
One of my favorite African proverbs is this one from Zimbabwe. Until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. That comes to mind for me because this is a very palpable moment in time. Because of the death of George Floyd and too many others over generations, but also because of the way all of us are responding to it. Your presence today is part of that response. We grieve as individuals, in our families, and our communities. We honor those whose lives have been taken from us. Yet, we are still willing to come together like this to tell our stories and use our truths to act with urgency that this moment requires. I've seen what people can do when they act based on those truths. As chair of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Board of Trustees, I can attest to the power of resolve and action. When we first identified racial equity as a critical component of our work in 2007, at that time it was considered bold and courageous. But it was very important because it gave our staff and our partners the confidence to be very intentional in our work. With the support of the board, they could identify and address the primary obstacle, racism, that confronted our children, families, and the communities that we serve. That leadership set the tone from the top and was crucial in moving from talk to measurable action. It is that same level of leadership that is needed now. I couldn't be more proud to be a part of the Kellogg Foundation's board. It is my prayer that love and justice will triumph over what we're grieving now. It is my hope that as we honor those who have lost their lives, what we experience in this healing event and learn from each other will uplift those of us who remain to do the work. At the Kellogg Foundation, we have learned that healing is at the heart of racial equity. As we grapple with the grief, the truth so many of us know, we can also prepare to heal. Thank you for joining us today to help all of us heal.
Omatioro, Noxtin, no me sin. My name is Jerry Tello, and I'm with the National Compadres Network and the Healing Generations Institute. And I come to you today in great gratitude, thanking Creator for another day of life, another day of growth, another day of opportunity. I also come in acknowledgement of our First Nations people of whose land we stand on. And I come to you today because this is a time of opportunity and transformation. And in my prayer today, it reminded me of the journey of our ancestors who have also struggled, who've gone through many of these things before. But it reminded me of an ancestor's wisdom that was shared with me that our ancestors had dreams. They struggled and they fought because they had a dream that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come into a world that would honor and respect them and see their sacredness. Those ancestors that build those traditions that I remember when I grew up. Grew up in Compton and remembering the mamas and the grandmothers, when a new baby would be born, they would wait with anticipation of that first breath of that baby. When that baby would come into the world and waiting for that breath or that cry or that sigh. And when baby came and cried or sighed, that breath, they were overjoyed because they knew with that breath, there was a new opportunity. There was a new life of sacredness that could help transform this world. And that breath is that same breath that George Floyd asked for, that many others have asked for when said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Can you allow me to breathe? Can you see me with sacredness? Can you respect me and honor me and recognize that I come with a sacred purpose too? And it's with that same sacred breath that I remember struggling with when I was a teenager in Compton where we grew up, because I was there during the first uprising. And there were National Guard on the corner of my house. There were men with AK-47s and I would see them and I would get afraid and my breath would be stagnated. And me and my friend, my best friend Tyrone would walk to school and we'd be afraid and our breath would be held because we were afraid they were going to hurt our mothers or our fathers or our grandparents. And that same breath that would be stagnated was also reminded me during 92 when Rodney King era came and I was working with young people. And I saw them get angry at the injustice. And I was afraid that the young people that I was working with were going to get hurt, but they were so angry that they needed to shout out from that breath something about justice, about inequity. And some of those young people that were so angry, the anger got so deep that it took them someplace else and they took their lives away. But that same anger is still here today, and we see it. We see it in the young people's breath that are on the street protesting and shouting for equity, speaking against racism, speaking up for justice. And it reminds me of why I made it today. I made it today because I had grandmas. I had my grandma that every day would bless me up. She would say, que Dios te bendiga, bless you, baby. And when I go to Miss Mosley's house to pick up Tyrone, Miss Mosley would say, bless you, baby, bless you, child. Those grandmas blessed me up. They reminded me and reminded Tyrone, reminded the children that we were all blessings. They had to inoculate us up to remind us we were blessings because we were living in a world that does not see us as blessings, did not honor our breath. And so my solidarity started there in Compton. Us black and brown, we started there. We've always been together. Many people of many races, of indoctrinated people in a Western way have grabbed to our culture to allow us to go on and survive. And today we join together in solidarity and say Black Lives Matter. We join with our African-rooted people so that their breath is honored, that they are respected. And we know in that language of my Mayan people, en la quech, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me, that where one of us heal, we all heal. Where justice prevails for one, it prevails for all. We stand together. We also know that we need to heal, that part of racial equity and part of racial justice is racial healing. So I invite you, let's go on this journey of racial equity and racial healing, and let's do it together. Let's bring the blessings of our ancestors forth so that we can ensure the next generation has more blessings. Thank you, and may Creator bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark and Jerry, both for your tireless work. Now, our next guest really doesn't need an introduction, but I'm the MC, so I'm going to MC, and I'm going to introduce this incredible human being. If there's a soundtrack to this movement and this moment, you know there's some John Legend on it. John has been in the fight for racial justice for years, and he is going to bless us. But before we get to John, we are going to hear from a man who knows we cannot begin healing the wounds of the present before reckoning with the violence of the past. Bryan Stevenson is the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and a lifelong champion for ending mass incarceration. As he often says, the opposite of poverty is not wealth, it's justice. I also want to add on a personal note, I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on my TED Talk, and so many people have found it because the algorithm sent them there after watching Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk. So please, Bryan, do what you do. Take it away.
Hi, my name is Bryan Stevenson, and I'm the director of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm honored to be a part of this important conversation that attempts to contextualize the moment that we are in the United States. For many Black Americans, we have been suffering and struggling with a history of racial inequality our entire existence on this continent. Black people were abducted, kidnapped, trafficked, chained, and brought to this continent enslaved. For 250 years, slavery created a mythology about Blackness that we've never really acknowledged. The great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude, it wasn't forced labor, it was this idea that Black people are not fully human. Black people aren't evolved, Black people are less deserving, Black people are less worthy. And that narrative of racial difference, which was first crafted when Europeans encountered Native people and slaughtered them by the millions, took their land, and used this idea that their racial difference made their victimization less important. Well, that very same narrative was used during enslavement to create and reinforce this ideology of white supremacy. And that was the true evil of American slavery. There was a civil war, a bloody, brutal civil war, that was intended to end the bondage, to end the servitude, but it didn't attempt to end this ideology of white supremacy. And because of that, I don't think slavery ended in 1865. I think it just evolved. It turned into decades of terror and torment and abuse. My organization has just put out a report called Reconstruction in America. It details that 12-year time period following the Civil War when our courts, our Congress, our nation abandoned the commitments made to Black people to protect them, to provide them with equal protection, to permit them to have the right to vote. We allowed lawlessness and violence to overcome our commitment to the Constitution and fair and just treatment. And as a result of that, this ideology of white supremacy had a new root. It had a new stranglehold on this nation. It was codified with Jim Crow laws. It was embraced and spread around this nation. And what resulted from that was decades of terror and violence. Black people were pulled out of their homes, they were beaten, they were lynched, they were menaced, they were traumatized by this violence. Millions fled the American South and went to communities in the North and West, in LA and Oakland, Los Angeles and Oakland, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, Boston. They went to these communities not as immigrants, but as refugees and exiles from terror. And our government did nothing while this violence took place, which added to the weight of being marginalized and excluded. And then, heroically, a group of courageous activists in the 1950s and 60s began to protest, to demand an end to segregation, to demand civil rights. They put their bodies on the line. They were literally bloodied and battered and beaten by uniformed police officers. And ultimately, these laws were passed, but that ideology persisted. It was replaced by a new institution, which we now call mass incarceration, because people never gave up on this idea of racial hierarchy, because they never valued fully the humanity and dignity of people of color. We saw a new institution. Our prison population went from 250,000 in 1972 to 2.2 million today. And today we have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Today, Black and brown people are still menaced and targeted, over-policed, over-prosecuted, over-convicted, over-sentenced. And the accumulation of all of this inequality, the accumulation of all of this injustice is anger, frustration, fatigue. I was taught as a product of Brown versus Board of Education that if I worked hard, if I did all of the right things, that I could find my way to an equal and just place in this society, and I did that. Despite the fact that public schools were open to me when I started my education, when integration came, I embraced it. I graduated from high school, I went to college, I went to Harvard Law School. I began practicing as a lawyer in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'd only been practicing a short while when, sitting outside my apartment one night, police officers drove up. I got out of my car to explain that this is where I lived, and in that instant they pulled a gun and threatened to blow my brains out. And I had to reassure them that I was not a risk. I had to make sure that I survived that encounter. And the bigotry an animosity that gave rise to that presumption of dangerousness and guilt, it still burdens me because I worried about what I would have done 10 years earlier when I was 17 or 18. I think about the fact that I might have run when those officers did that, and I worry about the young kids in my community, and that problem continues. And today we see these instances of police violence, and it weighs on us because when you've had to live with this threat and this menace year in and year out, when you have to deal with these presumptions of dangerousness and guilt, and it doesn't seem to matter how much money you make, how many degrees you have, how kind you are, how hardworking you are, it doesn't seem to matter how old you get when you have to live in a world like that, you get to the point where you say, I'm tired. And we are tired. And it is now that there is this opportunity and this obligation to do something, to change things, to create a new kind of relationship to our history. In South Africa and Rwanda and Germany, those countries recognized that to make progress, to heal, to move forward, they were going to have to commit themselves to truth and justice. And what you see in those nations is evidence that people have been willing to talk honestly about the burdens of apartheid, about the horrors of genocide, about the pain of a Holocaust. In this country, we haven't done that. We haven't talked about the native genocide. We haven't talked about slavery. We haven't talked about lynching. We haven't confronted the burden created by Jim Crow segregation. We ignore the multiple ways that Black people are menaced and threatened and marginalized. And now we have to change. There is a need to change. I believe we have to commit to an era of truth and justice. We have to tell the truth about our history. We have to tell the truth about the institutions that educate our young people, because many of them have histories where they were collaborators with this inequality and injustice that must be reckoned with. We have to tell the truth about banking and the insurance industry. We have to tell the truth about government and what it failed to do. We have to tell the truth about every aspect of our society that has failed to live up to the ideas that made this nation the great nation that so many aspire to live in. And I don't think we should fear this opportunity for truth-telling. I actually think we should embrace it. I'm not interested in talking about the history because I want to punish America. I'm interested because I want to liberate us. I believe there is something that feels more like freedom, feels more like equality, feels more like justice waiting for us. But to get there, we're going to have to commit to truth and justice. And the thing we have to remember is that truth and justice, truth and reconciliation, truth and restoration, truth and reparation, these things are sequential. You have to first tell the truth before you get to justice. And so today we are calling on our friends, our colleagues, our allies, every institution to engage in a meaningful, sincere, continued effort at truth-telling that leads to justice, that leads to repair, that leads to remedy. In our policing space, there's an urgent need to reimagine the way we police in this country. For too long, we've used crime and punishment, we've used fear and anger to shape the way we train and situate officers. We need to reimagine that. We made this misguided decision to declare a war on drugs. We treated people who have drug addiction and drug dependency as criminals when we should have treated them as people in need of a healthcare intervention. We need a team, a department of healthcare workers who can manage the healthcare problems that manifest. We need people who can deal with addiction. We need people who can deal with homelessness. Most issues are not security issues, so we have to reimagine how we meet the needs of communities and create the sort of support services that will help us both promote public safety and avoid the violence and brutality that so many have seen. We need to reimagine our criminal justice system. We put people in jails and prisons who are not a threat to public safety. We spend billions of dollars warehousing people when we could be investing those dollars into healthier communities. Reimagining our criminal justice system is at the heart of the work of the Equal Justice Initiative. It's why we fight for the condemned. It's why we stand next to people who have been convicted and improperly sentenced. It's why we are pushing for a new day. I invite you to join us in this effort. I understand some of you are going to be looking at Just Mercy, the book and the movie. I am so pleased to hear that. We have other assets that I invite you to review, our reports on slavery, on Reconstruction, on lynching, on segregation can be found at our website, www.eji.org. We have other resources. We have calendars where we educate people daily on this history of racial injustice. we want you to engage. I want to personally invite all of you to come to Montgomery and spend time at our museum, the Legacy Museum, from slavery to mass incarceration, our memorial, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, our pavilion. We invite you here. And if none of these things work for you, find things in your community that you can join, that you can access, that you can participate in. But whatever you do, end the silence that has given rise to all of this inequality, all of this injustice. Join the movement, join the effort to create the kind of country, the kind of communities that we deserve, communities where no one is presumed dangerous and guilty because of their color, where race and ethnicity doesn't disadvantage and disfavor you, where opportunities for education and health care are available equally to everyone. I'm excited about that kind of community, that kind of state, that kind of nation. I hope you are too, and I'm grateful to all of the important thinkers, voices, activists, and advocates that are contributing in their own way to making the kind of just society that so many of us dream of. Thank you all very, very much.
We shall overcome. It's more than a protest song. It's a promise to those who would oppress us, that we're here, we matter, and together we will fight for what is right and just. The great John Lewis said this song gave him and his fellow civil rights demonstrators a sense of faith, a sense of strength to continue to struggle, to continue to push on. It's long past time that we tear down the broken systems this country was founded upon and begin to heal, reimagining a whole and equal society where you aren't disadvantaged, locked up, or killed just because of the color of your skin. We must stay united and push on, continuing the momentum and building even louder the chorus of voices saying that Black Lives Matter. And I hope this song inspires you, as it does me, to continue speaking out, marching, and working in your communities. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, oh, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday. Thank you.
Thank you, John and Bryant. Next, we are fortunate to have some of the most stellar voices on race and equality in America right now. First, we're going to hear from former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu. Now, a lot of white folks talk a big game about tearing down white supremacy, and then there's Mitch, who's actually done it. From removing Confederate statues to reorganizing the New Orleans Police Department, Mitch has a foundation now, E Pluribus Unum, that works toward racial and economic justice. Then we have Dr. David R. Williams. I need you to brace yourself for David R. Williams, professor of public health and African American studies and sociology, all at Harvard University. That's too much, David. Stop being so impressive. Okay, I just had to get that off my chest. He's basically the most qualified person on the planet for us to hear from in this moment. We will also hear from Kathy Ko Chin, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and nationally recognized authority on health policy, as well as a tireless advocate for the Asian American community. The daughter of Chinese immigrants, Kathy served on the Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the Obama administration. But first, let's hear from former Mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu.
There are so many voices that talk to us across the ages, so many words of truth that have been spoken since the beginning of time. What it means to be equal, what it means to love one's neighbor, what it needs to reach out and lift up and to walk along somebody else, what it means to be indivisible, to be locked arm in arm. That is what we need today. We spoke those words early at the birth of our nation, but this was a nation that was born in contradiction. Slavery, as you know, was this nation's original sin. Racism continues to be its Achilles heel. We speak the words of indivisibility, but yet we are separate. We speak the words of communion, but we live in a world of I am better than you. We speak the words of a more perfect union, and yet we do things every day that continue to divide us as a country. In my travels across the South with E Pluribus Unum, we talked to 33 counties. We went to a number of different states, 13 in all. We talked to over 1,000 people. And although we came back with many conclusions, many hard truths, where we find common ground, where we found places where there was a bridge too far, the one thing that stuck out more than anything else is that this country was divided by design, either through malignant intent or benign neglect, but it was divided by design nevertheless. The only way to fix it is to redesign it. Redesign it, not in a way that we never anticipated, but redesign it in a way that we had promised from the beginning. And so as we began to build back after a massive economic crisis, after the disparate impacts of COVID-19, after the deaths of George Floyd, and so many others that go all the way back to Emmett Till and before, we cannot build this country back the way it was, because it wasn't great for everybody before. We have to build it back the way it should have been, had we gotten it right the first time. We have a long way to go, but there is hope, because hope springs eternal. We have seen many people who have suffered so much over the many years, yet they keep going one step at a time and said very clearly, we're not going to let anybody turn us around. I'm hopeful today. I'm saddened by where we are. I'm a bit angry that it has taken us so long, but it is time again to redouble our efforts to be allies once again and to stand in solidarity arm in arm, so that that promise of indivisibility will not just be a dream, but a reality for us all. And so therefore, what it means to be an ally is to take the time to listen, take the time to learn. In our travels across the South, one of the things that we learned is whites, not all, but many who responded to our calls to be interviewed and surveyed do not understand, do not accept, or do not know about institutional racism. They think racism is restricted just to a negative act between one person and another, and do not see the systemic misdesign of our systems and a disparate impact. It is time for white America to get educated, to educate themselves about this very difficult situation. That is what an ally does. An ally listens, an ally asks, an ally learns, an ally says, what is it that I did? And what is it that I can do to do better? How can I stand shoulder to shoulder with you and make sure that you, like I, have available to me the rights and the liberties that was promised every American since the beginning of our time? It should be clear that we may not all be at fault, but it is equally clear that we're all responsible, and we will carry that burden together into the future. Thank you.
We are living in a time when we are caught in the triple pandemic of COVID-19, of economic distress, and of racism. The virus, COVID-19, has disproportionately impacted communities of color, especially the African American community, but Native American communities and some Pacific Islander communities have also been very badly hit. Why is this the case? Why are our people suffering so badly? Around the world, income and education is a powerful driver of differences in health within a population. Those at greatest risk of exposure are those who are most economically disadvantaged. And in the United States, in 2018, African Americans earned only 59 cents for every dollar of income that whites earned. That is identical to the racial gap in income in 1978. You heard me right, 1978, the peak year of the narrowing of the black-white gap in income as a result of the anti-poverty policies and the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. We had narrowed the gap to 59 cents, and in 2018, we are still at 59 cents. We need to accelerate progress in improving the economic status of African Americans. And how does low income hurt the health of the African American and other populations of color in the United States? Low income means we are in the same storm, but we are in different boats. And we don't have the resources to deal with the storm. Essential workers are more likely to reside in communities where they don't have access to all of the resources that facilitate a successful fight against the coronavirus, such as being able to safely social distance. They are also working at jobs where they don't have the luxury of working from home. And they are working at jobs where they have higher levels of exposure to the virus. And on top of that, when they enter healthcare contexts, they are less likely to get the best care and to get the optimal care in the United States. So all of these factors come together to make COVID-19 worse for populations of color. And then our populations of color also have higher rates of the comorbidities, high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, respiratory problems that puts them at higher risk. And why do they have these higher comorbidities? They have them because they are exposed to higher levels of stress. Research clearly indicates that economic stress and psychosocial stress, such as the loss of loved ones, leads to higher risk of disease. And on top of these traditional stressors, they struggle with the stress of discrimination. I developed many years ago the Everyday Discrimination Scale that captures 9 ways in which people's dignity is taken away from them every day. Being treated with less courtesy or respect than others, receiving poorer service than others at restaurants or stores, people acting as if they think you are not smart or if they're afraid of you. And what research shows that all of the comorbidities linked to COVID-19, when you are high on discrimination, you're more likely to be obese, more likely to get high blood pressure early, more likely to have the rapid development of subclinical heart disease. So what can we do about these crises? Yes, we need everyone to have access to high quality medical care, but that is only the beginning. We need to have a transformation of our communities, investments that ensures that everyone has access to the opportunities to be successful, high quality education, access to a good job that pays a living wage, access to getting the skills that prepares you to have those jobs. So we need to work comprehensively to improve the quality of life in our communities. Robert Kennedy said, each time a man or woman stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And those ripples can build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. It is my hope that each one of us will make a new commitment today to be a ripple of hope, and together we can bend the arc of the universe in the direction of justice. I know we can do it together. Thank you.
The senseless killings of George Floyd in Minnesota, Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, and Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, and the disproportionate impact COVID-19 is having on communities of color, have all forced the nation to confront an unpleasant truth. That is, despite the tremendous progress we've made, we still have a long ways to go to address structural and systemic racism. We've watched for months as a wave of tragedies have crashed against the shores of communities of color, as we have suffered the economic hardship, the emotional pain, and the psychological trauma in ways disproportionately more than the rest of the population. Now, that collective discomfort has exposed the historical impact of racially and ethnically weaponized policies in our society. In these times, we were reminded of the powerful words once spoken by James Baldwin, who exclaimed, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced."
Thank you, Mayor Landrieu, Dr. Williams, and Kathy Cochin for those powerful words. Michelle Alexander isn't just a leading scholar on mass incarceration. She may be the leading scholar on mass incarceration. As a civil rights lawyer, New York Times columnist, and author of the seminal book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle is at the vanguard of the fight to transform our justice system into one that actually delivers justice. But before that, we have a performance from a young man with a powerful voice, 12-year-old gospel singer Keedron Bryant. Keedron's mother, Janetta, wrote him this song after hearing George Floyd cry out for his own mother. It's called I Just Want to Live.
In America, there's a lot of racial profiling and violence towards Black people, and I hope this song just brings about a change and that we can all come together as one and in harmony, and that we can be equal. I'm a young Black man doing all that I can to stand up when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind. Every day I'm being haunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just want to live. God protect me. I just want to live. I just want to live.
Hi, my name is Michelle Alexander. I'm grateful to have a bit of time to reflect on the meaning of the moment we're in. As a nation, it seems we may finally be waking up after a long, long slumber. In recent weeks, it's been stunning to see so much beauty arising out of the tragedy of recurring police violence and killings of our people. There is much to grieve and much to celebrate in this moment. And there is much uncertainty. One thing we know for sure is that this particular moment will pass. So let's take a vow today. Let's vow to ourselves and to one another that we will never, ever go back to sleep, that things will never return to normal. Never again will we act as though it's someone else's job to stand up for someone else's justice. It's always our job to stand up for one another. It's always our job to speak up when the system has its knee on someone's neck. I hope we commit to a radically different path than the one that has brought us to this moment in time. We must face our racial history and our racial present. We cannot solve a problem we do not understand. It's not enough to learn the broad outlines of our racial history, Only by pausing long enough to study the cycles of oppression and resistance does it become clear that simply being a good person or not wishing Black people any harm is not sufficient. There are many excellent books, articles, and films that can help to put our racial moment in context. One of my favorites is There is a River, The Black Struggle for Freedom in America by Vincent Harding, in which he documents the revolutionary river that is the Black freedom struggle. We must learn from whence we came, all of us, if we are to envision a new future for ourselves, individually and collectively. And we must reimagine justice. The days of pretending that tinkering with our criminal and justice system will fix it are over. The system is not broken. It's functioning according to its design. Reform efforts over the decades have proven largely futile, pouring vast sums of money into police departments without removing their capacity to engage in systemic violence. The Minneapolis Police Department itself was held up as a model of progressive police reform before George Floyd was murdered. The department adopted community policing, implemented an early warning system, and offered trainings on implicit bias, mindfulness, mental health intervention, and de-escalation. But George Floyd was still murdered because police are empowered to respond to a wide range of social problems with violence, and because policing has always meant surveilling and violently controlling the poor, the dispossessed, and all those who are Black and brown. That has been true since police chased runaway slaves and returned them to their owners, and it is true today. Our nation has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. More than 95% of arrests every year are for nonviolent offenses like loitering, fare evasion, and theft. Some are arrested for selling loose cigarettes, which resulted in Eric Garner being choked to death by the police, or minor forgery, which resulted in George Floyd being suffocated to death by the police. Drug offenses are the largest category of arrests in the United States. People are right to wonder, is this justice? Can't we design alternative approaches to poverty, drug abuse, mental illness, trauma, and violence that would do less harm than police, prisons, jails, and lifelong criminal records? The answer is yes. Yes, we can. And people in communities, large and small, are beginning to do precisely that, embracing restorative and transformative justice models and divesting from police and prisons in order to invest in schools, healthcare, green jobs, and more. If we want racial justice, we must fight for economic justice and commit to transforming our economic system. If our nation was not so deeply divided along racial lines, and if so many white people were not revolted by the idea of their tax dollars helping people of color obtain education, housing, and social benefits, we would most likely already have democratic socialism or social democracy like Norway or Canada. Achieving economic justice requires that we work for racial justice and vice versa. There is no way around it. If we fail to take these obvious steps, our democracy will remain in peril no matter who wins or loses in November. Police killings, uprisings, and riots will remain a recurring feature of American life. The Black-white economic divide is as wide today as it was in 1968. And once again, we find ourselves facing a social and political climate in which open bigotry is flourishing, and some political leaders are hinting they would welcome a civil war. Unless we choose a radically different path now, our persistent racial divisions and oppressive political and economic systems may unravel our democracy sooner rather than later. Our only hope for our collective liberation is a politics of deep solidarity rooted in love, combined with a long-term commitment to movement building from the bottom up. In recent days, we've seen what it looks like when people of all races, ethnicities, genders, and backgrounds rise up together, standing in solidarity for justice, protesting, marching, and singing together, even as the SWAT teams and tanks roll in. We have seen the horror of police killings and endless videos revealing police violence. But we have also seen the best of who we are and what we can become. Those beautiful images may not have dominated the media coverage, but I've glimpsed in a foggy mirror scenes of a beautiful, courageous nation struggling to be born.
Thank you, Keedron and Michelle Alexander, for sharing your voices with us. To our audiences, if you are finding this gathering, this healing in action event useful, motivating, even inspiring, please join us for the National Day of Racial Healing. The National Day of Racial Healing is held annually the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Day in January. Next year's event will be January 19th, 2021. I'm pleased to welcome Diane Wolk-Rogers, an AP history teacher and member of the Solidarity Council on Racial Equity. Diane is an educator in every sense of the word and has dedicated herself to inspiring the next generation of leaders and activists to pursue racial equity through solidarity, conversation, and mutual respect. In a moment, we'll hear from Henry Kravis, the co-founder of global investment firm KKR. He's also the chairman of the nonprofit Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. Henry is a champion of diversity in both the boardroom and the classroom. Afterwards, we will hear a broken hallelujah from the triple threat Isabel Delgado, an activist, pianist, and singer from West Michigan, where she recently organized a march to demand justice for Breonna Taylor. Now, please join me in welcoming Diane Wolk-Rogers, or as I affectionately refer to her, Diane Wolk-Rogers. You'll see why. Just watch. Watch her.
Hi, my name is Diane Wolk-Rogers. In 1982, I began my career in South Florida public schools teaching K-12 education. Back then, I worked to provide support to students with learning and emotional disabilities, including by helping mainstream those students into then called regular classrooms. It was my aim to expand inclusion and diversity through the school system. And now, 35 years later, I am still fighting to make our classrooms more empathetic and inclusive spaces. Today, our students continue to face enormous challenges, including racism, environmental degradation, a failing healthcare system, resource-scarce neighborhoods, sexism, an unstable economy, gun violence, and global polarization. Student rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide have risen to record highs. As we look to reshape what schools look like in the wake of COVID-19, school systems have an incredible opportunity to rethink the curriculum. It is time to challenge the values that are being reflected in that curriculum. This is truly a teachable moment. I know all about turning difficult times into teachable moments. In 2018, I was teaching world history when a shooter attacked my workplace, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Afterwards, my students were terrified to come back to school. I could not at first understand how to motivate my students to learn in the classroom again when their attention was rightfully focused on contemporary threats and challenges. So instead, I focused on tending to the social, emotional needs of my students. This experience made clear I was not only a history teacher, I was teaching students how to be resilient leaders of a kind and more just world. Here's how you can too. First, make a space for safe and inclusive learning environments. School districts need funds to invest in programs that address the systematic health and educational inequities made clear by COVID-19. Students can hardly learn in the classroom when they are facing threats from police brutality, hunger, illness, and homelessness. Second, now's the time to rethink the curriculum. When crafting a lesson, I ask my students to think critically about whose history is being taught. What values are being reinforced? In my history lessons, I often need to use primary source documents in order to hear all perspectives, and I rarely rely on the school textbook. Socratic seminars are a key tool to develop communication skills around difficult and complex topics. In math and sciences, you might think about teaching students who often speak out with answers to listen. And students who are predisposed to step back, well, keep inviting them to share. Third, create community. Following the horrific shooting at my school, rather than seeing my students as victims or survivors, they became mind-body ambassadors and taught mental health wellness skills to their peers, parents, and community workers. During the coronavirus pandemic, my ambassadors are leading healthcare workers in joy-burst mental health breaks. You too can connect students with meaningful, community-centered work projects. And the most important skill we all can teach beginning on day one is modeling for our students how to be community leaders and change makers. We want our students to be upstanders, not bystanders. By doing so, one day, every child can learn to love themselves, love others, be a leader, and contribute to a culture of respect and caring. As educators, our aim should be to build a more humane and just society, help our students to be the leaders our world needs. So again, 1, rethink the curriculum and ensure it reflects all communities. 2, take time to really see your students and realize their full potential. 3, commit to teaching students to care about each other and to serve their communities. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Henry Kravis. I'm co-founder, co-chairman, and co-CEO at KKR. And I'm happy to be able to speak to you today about something that's very important to all of us at KKR, and that is inclusion and diversity. It's something that we must all tackle. All of us in industry, all of us in the alternative investment space must make it a priority. And it must start at the top. The CEO of any organization has to buy into this, or it won't happen. But it will happen if the person at the top decides that it's something that's important to their organization and their company. Now, one of the things that we've done is we set a goal several years ago to make sure that at least 80% of the companies in which KKR controls in the U.S. would have 2 diverse members of their board. And I'm happy to say that in the first quarter of this year, we reached that goal. We also are pushing for 1 director of diversity in every company that we do not control. Now, that may sound like not a lot, and it's true, it's not a lot, but it's a start. And our goal now is to get to 100% of the companies that we control to have at least 2 diverse board members. Now, within KKR, we look at the funnel of talent coming in. And we concluded that our talent pool that we drew from was far too narrow. And it was limited. Historically, for a number of reasons, women and people of color have routinely been limited and not had the access to the elite talent pools of which we hire. So 6 years ago, we made it a priority by setting up an Inclusion and Diversity Council. And at the same time, we went out and we hired a Chief Diversity Officer. And I'm proud to say that we have made a lot of change. And in addition to that, in order to increase that funnel of talent, we partnered with diverse organizations like Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, SEO, the Twego Foundation, and Girls Who Invest. This is the only way that we found that we could pull that talent. And as long as we made a decision that meet as many candidates of color, we'd be able to pick the best that we could find. And we created conditions so that those who did come to KKR could thrive. We created a workplace that actually reflects the communities in which we live in and work in.
I wrote this song to uplift Black and brown voices because that's what I'm called to do, and that's what we're all called to do. And so this song is called Broken Hallelujah.
and I lift my hands, I get on my knees, and I bow my head, and I let the tears fall. Tears, I let them fall. I let them fall. I let them fall, 'cause one day I'll fly. Pray that God will see the glory and be a light to tell our stories. But for now, it's just a broken hallelujah, broken hallelujah.
Thank you, Isabel, for the beautiful music. Whew. Our next two speakers know how to take a moment and turn it into a movement. Linda Sarsour is a force to be reckoned with. Trust me when I say this. She is an award-winning civil rights activist, a legendary community organizer. She was one of the co-chairs of the Women's March, the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. The Reverend Alvin Herring is also a believer in the power of people-founded movements. As the executive director of Faith in Action, Reverend Herring has inspired people of faith across the world to join together in the pursuit of racial justice. We are honored to have them with us today. Take it away, Sister Linda.
My name is Linda Sarsour, and I'm the executive director of Empower Change and the co-founder of Until Freedom. Many of you know me as the unapologetic Palestinian Muslim American activist and organizer from Brooklyn, New York. I came to this work almost 2 decades ago after the horrific attacks of 9/11, where I watched my beloved Arab American and Muslim American communities that I came from vilified, criminalized, targeted, and dehumanized. But I knew early on that the fight for justice for Arab American and Muslim American communities was intertwined with the fight for justice for other marginalized people and communities of color. So I became an intersectional organizer. I organize at the intersections of racial justice, immigrant rights, criminal justice reform, and economic justice. Audre Lorde said, "How can we have single issue struggles if we do not live single issue lives?" And she was absolutely correct. Look, we are in a historic moment. We are literally watching history unfold. There's a new generation that has rose up and said, enough is enough, and this time we mean it. This time is also overwhelming. There's so much pain and trauma and anger and frustration. A lot of that righteous anger at the centuries of injustice that this country has inflicted on Black people and other communities of color. We have a moment here, a moment towards transformative change, but we must be consistent in our organizing, consistent in our commitment. As Nipsey Hussle said, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. There are a few things that we can all do in this moment. Number one, take care of ourselves and our mental health, because this is a long, long fight, and we must sustain ourselves for the work ahead. Showing up when we hear that there's a protest or a rally or a gathering for justice, that we show up in those places, that our physical presence is in fact important, needed, and will be embraced. I understand that there's a COVID pandemic, so you can wear a mask and protect yourself and engage in social distancing and still be able to participate in democracy. This is also the time for us to hold our elected officials accountable. Elected officials work for the people, they work for the voters, and we need to make sure they understand that. This is also a time to ensure that your local city and town budgets actually reflect your morals and your values and your principles. That is a moral document. And I hope that you will push your elected officials to ensure that your budgets do not emphasize or prioritize criminalization, punishment, and policing, but in fact focus on investment in youth, in seniors, in housing, in quality education, in healthcare infrastructure, and transportation. This is also an election year, and every year is an election year, making sure that you are registered to vote and that you are participating in our democracy. If voting didn't matter, there wouldn't be legislators across the country trying to take our right to vote away from us. This is also a time for courageous conversation. We all have anti-Black racism in our communities. We have elements of xenophobia in our communities and homophobia and transphobia. And this is an opportunity for us to have those hard conversations. Only we can transform those that we love. So let's reach back deep into our communities and eradicate racism at its root. I am working towards a country that will respect the dignity of all those who reside here. And I know that you too want the same. So let's support those on the front lines who are doing this work every day. Find an organization in your local community, give them a donation, make sure you ask how they're doing, and make sure that you show up and volunteer your time. We are on the verge of something historic and amazing, and I'm so proud to be on this journey with all of you.
Hello, I'm Reverend Alvin Herring, National Director of Faith in Action, and I'm so glad you decided today to attend this special event hosted by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Healing in Action, which is part of its field-leading initiative, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. My hope is that you joined us today out of interest or commitment to racial justice and racial equity. And if that's the case, then I want to greet you with a special greeting, a Zulu greeting, Sawubona. Sawubona literally means I see you, that you matter to me, that your presence gives me life. It's an acknowledgement. And in this moment when we are facing such tremendous challenges in the world around us and dealing with the loss of life of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, may they rest in power, and so many others, beginning the work of seeing one another and allowing that work to move us into transformative action is the focus and the intention that so many are making right now in this moment. You see, I submit to you that to move us from acknowledgement to action, we've got to first conjure up a stronger, deeper commitment to love. Not the sentimental love, although that's wonderful. It makes us feel warm and good on the inside, and it helps to grow fondness. But a deeper love, a love that allows us to lean in together and build community with one another. And when we lean in, based on the power of that love, when we build something together, we're able then to create something that's so wonderful and so sacred that it can hold all of our differences, all of our identities, all of our cultures, all of our languages, all of who we are. And with the power of that love, we can face down the challenges that we have to face and begin to create the change that we all know needs to happen. So the challenge before us is, do we generate that love now through our work, or do we leave this work for some future generation? But we know that either now or some later point, we're gonna have to lean in together and build this sacred community and the vessel that can hold all of the wonderful ways in which we are different and the same. And so days like this help us understand that action is required. So what is that action? What do we do? What should a person do who wants to help in the work of building racial equity and racial justice? I submit to you, what they do is first see one another, and then upon seeing, recognize that what you're seeing on the outside is reflective of what's going on with you on the inside. So there's personal liberation work to do, and if we do it together, side by side with one another, that sums up to community liberation and community change. But more importantly, we have to make a commitment right now that the world that we want for our children, the world that we want for our grandchildren, the world that we want even for ourselves today, will not come to fruition without us deciding right now, in this moment, to act. We all belong to one another, and when we start acting like that, then real change can happen. So I'm challenging you as I'm challenging myself. Let's do it together. Sawubona.
Thank you, Linda and Reverend Herring, for sharing your wisdom and your words with us. And thanks to everyone who's spoken, sang, watched, listened, tweeted, commented, or otherwise joined our community today. There are days when the fight before us feels unwinnable, when the idea of healing centuries-old wounds and trauma seems impossible. The kidnapping and enslavement of an entire race of people is one of America's original sins, right up there with the genocide of indigenous peoples. And hundreds of years later, we're still having a hard time atoning for that. But now is the time to step up and to speak out. We don't have the luxury of getting stuck in the stage of despair. This work demands we show up every day, even when we don't see the results of our work, especially when we're tired. We've got to start with ourselves. It can be so tempting to point out injustice over there somewhere, far away from our homes and our communities and our organizations. Oh, there's the oppression. Stop doing that bad thing way off yonder. But the truth is, we have the most power where we sit. We need to be asking ourselves, what changes in my place of work are necessary? What changes in my house of worship, in my community, in my household, in myself? And we all have a circle of people we can influence. We're all basically influencers. Sorry. Let's be thoughtful about the words we choose to use and the words we choose not to. And let's be especially attentive to where we put our attention, our time, and our money. Change is not inevitable, but it is possible. Now, you've heard a lot of compelling ideas about the sort of actions we need to take to get this change sustained. Here is a brief, non-comprehensive list of some of those items. Vote. Just get on that like there's no excuse unless you are legally prohibited from doing so. You need to vote all the time, all day, every day. When there's not an election, be getting ready for the next one and reflecting on the last one, okay? Vote like it's your job, because it's literally your job in national and especially local elections. Get counted in the US Census. Visit my2020census.gov. A census is like a super vote. When you cast it, the effects last for 10 years. And the effects are how much money does your community get to fix these ratchet bridges and this broke down infrastructure? How many representatives do you get in Congress advocating for you? And a whole host of other matters. Get educated about the local issues where you are and learn what organizations are doing to address them. Get involved in your community, not just by voting, but by understanding what's important to that community. Attend a local community meeting. Talk to a neighbor about something other than the dog poop in front of your residence. Thank you again for coming and joining us today. I hope you heard something here that educated you, moved you, inspired you, or maybe even all three. We invite you to stay on for our final segment, a tribute of 8 minutes and 46 seconds to commemorate all of the lives lost and to reflect on the ideas provided today on how we can take action. Our hearts are broken and we grieve together as the news stories continue to come. The heartbreak doesn't cease. Let's heal together, but let's also remember that broken hearts don't change things. Action changes things. I hope these 8 minutes and 46 seconds of reflection inspire you, wherever you are in the world, to commit to real change and a new normal where we end systemic racism together. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand. So let's keep demanding, keep pushing, keep marching for that better world. Have a good night or morning if you're watching this later. I don't want to discriminate against the morning people. Stay safe. Let's keep each other safe. Let's take care of each other.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.